Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, September the 8th, 2025. I want to talk about the United Kingdom and what's going on in my home country. There's just been a bit of a political crisis. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has been forced to step down because of a mistake she made in terms of her property tax. She underpaid, I think. She underpaid to the tune of £40,000, and she should have known better. And so, yeah, she's gone, at least for the moment. And there's been a cabinet reshuffle. And, there is a general view that Britain is, maybe falling apart. So I thought that it would be a good opportunity to do an update on Britain and what's going on astrologically. But before I look at the UK, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, Monday, September the 8th. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. So anyway, as far as what's going on in this chart, the moon at noon New York time is at 28 degrees Pisces, so it's getting ready to move into Aries. And this is a reminder that we have just had a total eclipse. So total eclipse is a particular type of full moon, and this is a full moon which completely lined up, and so it's not just something that just happens in one moment and then disappears the next. And I think that, through Monday with the moon in Pisces, opposition the sun in Virgo, we're feeling the after effects of this. And some of us might have a new realization. We might be really seeing the truth for what it really is. And we might not like the truth, we might not even accept the truth, but the truth is certainly available. And now that the eclipse is over, at least the sort of immediate impact is over, we might be getting some perspective on this. And the moon is making a trine to Jupiter. So the moon in Pisces making a trine to Jupiter in Cancer. That is a fortunate aspect. The moon and Jupiter are in mutual reception. They're in each other's signs. And so, having just had the eclipse, maybe we can start to get things together. So having had a powerful realization, seeing the truth of the matter, we can then take action. And at first, we might be worried about whether we can really sort it out, whether we've really got what it takes. But maybe we have, and maybe it's going to be okay. And if we, put in the work, and not a great deal of work, we just have to be kind of accept that things have changed, but we don't have to be overly dramatic about it. So yeah, if we can put in the work, then maybe things are going to be okay. And then the moon eventually moves into Aries. So as far as when the moon moves into Aries, well, if you're in London, that's at 1937. So sort of just before 8 in the evening, the moon moves into Aries. So if you're in continental Europe, that will be an hour later. So this evening in Europe, moon moves into Aries, probably Africa as well. If you're in Asia or Australia, New Zealand, then the moon won't move into Aries until tomorrow. Now, if you're in the Americas, then that would be sort of early afternoon, maybe even late morning if you're in California or Alaska or Hawaii. So that is an important sign change. The moon moving into a cardinal sign, and when the moon moves into Aries, it makes a conjunction to Neptune. And, just before it moves into Aries in late Pisces, it makes a conjunction to Saturn. So Moon trine Jupiter, that's a nice aspect, but having gone through that, the Moon does move on, and it does make a conjunction to Saturn. And so, Moon conjunct Saturn can be difficult, and this Moon conjunct Saturn is on Skeet. Skeet is a star often connected with accidents and disasters, and I don't think that we're necessarily going to have accidents, but we might just feel nervous and worried. We live in difficult times, and perhaps that conjunction between Moon and Saturn will remind us of this fact. And then the Moon having moved into Aries, it makes a sextile to Uranus and a sextile to Neptune. So, in other words, the Moon will be on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint, and it's also a time when the Sun will be on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. Sorry, did I say Uranus and Neptune? Sorry, I said sorry, let me get this straight. The Moon will make a sextile to Uranus, then it will make a sextile to Pluto. So that means that the Moon will be on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. The Sun is, by the way, on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. So, that is the broad picture. And if you happen to be in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then at noon the Moon will be at 20 degrees 3 Pisces or thereabouts, if we set this chart for Sydney, Australia. So if you are in Australasia, the Moon doesn't move into Aries today. It stays in Pisces, all day long, and so perhaps the dominant aspect is going to be that Moon trine Jupiter. So maybe things won't be so bad in Australasia. Moon trine Jupiter, they're in mutual reception with each other, and so however dramatic things might feel, however much you might feel that you're still recovering from a total eclipse, that Moon trine Jupiter perhaps provides some healing, or it allows you to see the positive side of things. Sometimes it really is good to know the truth. It might be difficult seeing the truth, but once we see how things are, we're in a position to take successful action. And from a heliocentric view, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, here is a chart. Venus is still making a square to Neptune, and so with Venus making a square to Neptune heliocentrically. Now, geocentrically, Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. That was an aspect I didn't mention, and I perhaps should have mentioned. So that Venus-Neptune connection might mean that when it comes to dealing with other people, we might be confused. It might be difficult to know who we're dealing with. And we might make some assumptions about another person's personality or motivations, which could just turn out to be wrong. And we must also be careful about being, over-optimistic about how a relationship could progress. So if you think that someone's going to come up with the goods, it's going to honour their promises, they might. But with Venus aspecting Neptune, both geocentrically and heliocentrically, there's just some scope for deception. I'm not saying you will be deceived, but I think that you just have to be open to that possibility. And one thing that needs to be avoided today with those Venus-Neptune aspects is fantasy. I don't think fantasy will really get you anywhere, and except it will get you very disappointed. And then we've got Mercury making a square to Uranus. So in fact, we've got Mercury making a quincunx to Saturn, and a square to Uranus. So Saturn is slowly starting to move towards a sextile to Uranus, and that's quite a useful aspect of sextile. It creates sort of a useful tension that we can perhaps use for our own purposes. But then Mercury coming in, making a quincunx to Saturn, making a square to Uranus, well, I'm not sure how useful that tension is. And there's just something going on. It feels like something is going on. We're not quite sure what it is, but it's just difficult to relax. And Mercury square Uranus, it feels like maybe something should be said, but can we say it? Do we have the opportunity to say it, or should we just keep quiet? I mean, maybe the easy option is to keep quiet, but is that really the right thing to do? If something isn't right, and you just know it's not right, then maybe you just have to be open about it. So those are the positions heliocentrically, or at least the positions that I regard as being important. I probably missed something. And now I'm going to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, September the 8th, 2025. Aries, it's a day of change. You're moving from sort of one state of mind to another, and I think as the day progresses, you're likely to become more positive and more outward going. At the beginning, you might have your doubts. You might be worried about whether you're doing the right thing, and there might be some fear. You might worry that if you get it wrong, there could be serious implications, and you might just feel that it's just best to sort of hold back, not take too many risks. And you may even sort of have some evidence, or think you've got evidence, that really it's best to do nothing. You might have a sort of short-term setback, or something might happen that just confirms your caution. But it's important that you don't take anything too seriously, that just because things start in a way that is perhaps a bit rocky, and there might be some early setbacks, that's not really the way it's necessarily going to end. And I think that as you move through the day, you'll see ways forward, and you'll start to see opportunities to be yourself, and also to look at things in a different way. And all the while, your brain is going to be very active. Over the last few days, actually, your brain has been on really quite good form, and you've had sort of all sorts of ideas, and you haven't been satisfied to just assume that your first impressions are correct, that you've been prepared to look at things in many different ways. And it's now a time when you can really take advantage of this ability. So if you see an obstacle in front of you, you should look at this obstacle and say, well, you can look at it from this way, and you can look at it from that way, and then you can realize that there's a way through. So it's important that you give yourself plenty of variety, and also that you allow yourself to be surprised. I mean, you can be surprised by what someone else says, but you can also be surprised what you actually think. You might suddenly have a realization, and it might seem crazy. It might seem completely unworkable, but if you're prepared to put it into action, to take that first step, then I think that you can make really very good progress. And by the end of the day, and sort of certainly into Tuesday, the moon will be moving out of Pisces into Aries. Aries is, of course, your sign, and so when the moon moves into Aries, moon could move into Aries. Well, it could move into Aries, late morning if you're in, say, California or Alaska or Hawaii. But if you're if you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, it won't be until tomorrow, but the moon moves into Aries. But the point is, it is getting there. And, this is perhaps a time when you can sort of relaunch yourself. And, a lot of this might be tied to the total eclipse. Now, this total eclipse could have been confusing for many of you. And you might not have been sure how to respond. And you might perhaps have regarded the energy of the total eclipse as something which was just going to go on for days on end. And this is, of course, not true. Once the moon moves into Aries, starts moving into Aries, you start to see new possibilities. And maybe also Aries, you had some realizations and you had some thinking to do, and you had to do things in your own way, and you perhaps needed some space to work it all out. But now things are becoming clear. In a way, you have sort of got through the door. Once you move from one place to another, the process of change can be really disorientating. Things can just start sort of breaking up, and you don't know where you are. And then things start to clear, and you now see things that they seem pretty much the same as they used to be, but at the same time everything is different, but in a completely positive way. So I think that the changes going on today for you, do look pretty fortunate, but you do need to have a positive attitude, and you must be ready to take control. You don't want to be in a situation where you are overly reliant on other people. I mean, you could be. I mean, with Mars, Mars in Libra, Mars in your opposite sign, it is a time when many Arians feel that other people do need to be considered, how you've got to spend a lot of time worrying about what they want, worrying about their needs, but you can exaggerate. You don't want to exaggerate, and you don't want to be confused. Some people can be confused. Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. Venus is a planet of relationships. Can be about the other person, whoever that other person might be, and sesquiquadrate Neptune. Well, other people could be misleading. They might tell you stuff which is just not true. I mean, I'm not saying they're deliberately lying, but their confusion can rub off on you, and that's not something that you want to happen. And you shouldn't believe anything that anyone tells you. I mean, especially if you don't know them very well. And that is another reason why Aries, that today you need to be quite self-reliant. And the more self-reliant you can be, the better. Taurus. Venus is your ruling planet, of course. And, we do have to look at what Venus is doing. Venus is in the middle of Leo. And in the middle of Leo, it is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. Now, Neptune can be a difficult influence. And if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I take sesquiquadrates quite seriously. 135-degree aspect, 3/8 of a circle. And so Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune might indicate that, at some level you are not entirely sure of yourself. There's something you might be confused about, and it's kind of, tripping you up. I mean, you'd like everything to be completely clear-cut. I mean, to know exactly what is going on. I mean, that's the way you'd like it. You don't want confusion. But even then, you might get confusion. And, confusion can, take many forms, and it can come from a range of places. I mean, it might be that other people are confusing you. But it might also be the case, Taurus, that you are confusing yourself. You might feel something and your feelings could just get exaggerated, and you might reach conclusions. And, once you reach a conclusion, you might want to change your mind. So, don't assume that you've got everything sorted out, and also be aware of, how you are expressing yourself, and how you're communicating yourself, and how you're communicating your thoughts and your feelings. While it's true that you can at the moment be very clear and be very assertive, provided you stick to what you know and to stick to what you can touch, to stick to the facts, that's true. But if you're vague, and you could be vague, and I know that Taurus is not a vague sign. Taurus likes to be very straightforward, but somehow you might just not entirely know what you're doing, not entirely know what you're saying. And so, don't take clarity for granted. And if you're not sure about something, don't risk it. Don't make assumptions. And, that way, I think that, you should be okay. And also, Taurus, don't get too heavily involved with other people. You've just had this total eclipse, and for many Taurians, this total eclipse has made you think about other people, the people you meet every day, the connections you have, the friendships you have, and it might have given you a lot of thought in this direction. And as the moon, moves out of Pisces into Aries, it might occur to you that some people are just holding you back. Perhaps you're just talking about the past. People from the past, they may have been fine not so long ago, but things are changing. And so, don't feel that you have any particular obligation to another person. Okay, you've got to be loyal, you've got to an extent, you've got to be reasonable, you don't want to let anyone down, but sometimes an obligation can be misused. People can use that obligation to try to get you to do things their way, or to prevent you from moving on. And you do need to move on, you always need to move on. And so other people, they have their purposes, and you can help them, they can help you, but things very often don't last forever. And maybe as the moon moves out of Pisces into Aries, you may feel that you have to reconsider, and you have to reconsider in your own way, and that might be important. And going back to the way you communicate, you may be afraid of offending someone. Now, Taurians can be very blunt, and it's good to be blunt, but today you may not want to be honest. You might feel it's just better to be vague and to say maybe rather than no, but that wouldn't make anyone happy in the end. Instead, just be honest, be clear, say what you feel. And if you do that, not everyone will necessarily appreciate it, but you'll be saving yourself a lot of trouble in the future. And so that I think, Taurus, is very much the right approach. And just remember, Taurus, that not everyone can be trusted. Some people can lead you astray if you give them the chance. Gemini, the total eclipse is still hanging around. We've still got the moon in Pisces for some of the day, and if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you will have the moon in Pisces all day long. And the moon in Pisces, it's a good place for the moon to be. it makes a trine to Jupiter, and the moon and Jupiter are in mutual reception. In other words, the moon is in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign. Jupiter is in Cancer, which is the moon's sign. And so this link up between the moon and Jupiter does help you, Gemini, provided you use it in the right way. And this moon-Jupiter trine is not about doing anything crazy. It's not even about doing anything that is particularly original. It's just doing what is necessary, what you have to do to maybe maximize your success. And so if there's something that you feel has to be done, and perhaps you have to finish it off. I mean, it may be Monday, and Monday is sort of beginning of a new week, and so, new week, new obligations, new tasks, new responsibilities. That might be your approach, but there might be something that just you need to see through, and it may relate to the eclipse. It may be that you have started to understand something about yourself, about your direction, about what is important to you. And now, as the moon moves through late Pisces, you want to sort it out. And in the process, you can be lucky. Lucky not in necessarily in a dramatic way. We're not talking about necessarily having an amazing, life-changing success. Well, when we talk about amazing, life-changing success, we're reminded that, with astrology, there is a lot of pressure on astrologers to predict wonderful things. Wonderful things, happen every week of every year of every life. But the reality is, in the average lifetime, there are relatively few events, maybe half a dozen big events. So we must, be careful not to exaggerate. But, all things being equal, moon trine Jupiter can be fortunate, and can be fortunate in perhaps in a material way. So if there's something you've been trying to get hold of, perhaps of a financial nature, then I think that this moon Jupiter trine might help you. And maybe, going back to this total eclipse, you saw what was possible, or perhaps you were aware that you were being denied something, that there was a situation that you were being perhaps mistreated, or you were not being given full credit for something. Well, now you can deal with that issue and perhaps be demanding, be very clear about, what you want. And at the moment, Gemini, you're able to be really very, very assertive. So if there's something in your head that you want, you have real willpower, and you're really keen to get it, and you don't care what you have to do within reason, then this power is going to be obvious. And so don't doubt yourself. Geminis can doubt themselves. Geminis are always doubting themselves. Am I good enough? Is the situation right? Maybe it would be better if I waited until tomorrow. These kind of thoughts. You definitely shouldn't wait until tomorrow. I mean, if you have the chance, then go for it. And if even if you feel that you don't have enough power, well, you do have power. It's a day, Gemini, when you really know how to look after yourself, and you can deal with people who on the surface might be more influential than you, might be kind of people who just won't listen to you. Well, they can listen to you. They will listen to you if you are determined enough. And additionally, with this moon trine Jupiter that we have today, then that does allow you to get on with people. Okay, you can get things from them if need be, and you know how to you know how to ask. But if you just want to get on with people in a general sense, then I think you can. Then another aspect we have, just before the moon leaves Pisces and moves into Aries, is we have a conjunction to Saturn. And, Moon-Saturn conjunctions have a difficult reputation. It doesn't sound exactly sort of sweetness and light, Moon conjunct Saturn, does it? It sounds a bit harsh. But there is a place for harshness. And if you need to be harsh, and if you need to make it absolutely clear that you want something with that Moon conjunct Saturn, then I think that Moon conjunct Saturn can really help you, and you will be taken seriously. Cancer. The moon is in the process of changing signs. It's it starts the day in Pisces, and it may move into Aries. Certainly, if you're in the Americas, it will move from Pisces into Aries. If you're in Europe, okay, it won't be till this evening, but you get the sign change, and not until tomorrow if you're in Australasia. But Pisces and Aries, they're both good signs for the moon to be in. I mean, they are different. I think that Pisces, you could say, is a sign from a Cancerian perspective, which is probably sort of quite experimental, and it gives you the opportunity to explore and to work out new things, new ways of doing things. And, it's also gives you an awareness of just everything, the spirituality of the situation, and perhaps getting a sense of, where you're going, where your destiny is, but in a sort of quite a high level, sort of, perhaps relating to your spirituality and something that perhaps goes beyond just one lifetime if you believe in reincarnation. But, when it moves into Aries, Aries is a more definite sign. And so when that sign change happens, Cancer, you may suddenly think, well, hold on, something has to be done. Okay, you've done your thinking, you've done your experimenting, you've done your exploring, you've perhaps consulted different people, and it's now time to really focus on the things that matter. And so, it's so whether the moon is in Pisces or in Aries, I think that is by and large, quite fortunate. Though there can be a time when when the exploring stops, when you've worked out all the possibilities, and it's now time to just make the change. And so while the moon is in Pisces, the moon is also trine Jupiter, and that trine between the moon and Jupiter, it's a great aspect. The moon is in Pisces, Jupiter is in Cancer. So these two planets, they're in mutual reception, and it's very lucky for you. And this might be a time, especially at the beginning of the day, when you feel, Cancer, that you are maybe just in touch with something, that you are being looked after, that you are being given almost otherworldly information. It might not be very factual, but it's just about the feelings. You just feel something, and you can feel which way you're supposed to be going. You're being told. Perhaps the universe is whispering to you, and so you have a chance to not just align yourself, but you also have the chance to stabilize. And the reason for that is that the moon, having made a trine to Jupiter, that is the inspiration, that feeling that something is looking after you, but it's also there's something out there that wants you to do something, that has a path for you. But then the moon makes a conjunction to Saturn, and so the moon conjunct Saturn, that's more of a grounding feeling, but it's also a feeling that, okay, you've got all these ideas and all these inspirations, but you've got to bring them down to earth. You've got to make them real. It's not about just sort of drifting off in a cloud of fantasy. You have to, at some stage, decide what you need to do. And then the moon moves into Aries, whenever that might be, and that might be when you have to make it clear what you want and what you feel you need. And I think you can be clear. I mean, the moon does make a conjunction to Neptune when it moves into Aries, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Moon conjunct Neptune. It may be that you can tell people what you need without necessarily arousing any comment or getting any reaction. I mean, you don't need to be completely clear to everyone about what you want. I mean, some things are actually best kept secret, and maybe with the moon conjunct Neptune, that just helps you sort of create a bit of a cloud around you, and from within your cloud you have quite a lot of freedom to operate. Now, in terms of relationships, moon is making a conjunction to Saturn, as I've already said, and from a relationship angle in the Cancerian chart, moon conjunct Saturn can be about you and another person being close to one another. And it's a time when you've got to accept the kind of person you're dealing with, this kind of person you're with, and it may not be a relationship but is necessarily equal. One of the two parties might have the power, might have the ability to influence, might be you, might be the other person, but it's okay, provided you are focusing on the right people. Okay, it is possible that moon conjunct Saturn could represent a situation where another person is somehow holding you back, and with no benefit. Well, okay, if it's that situation, then you need to break free, and I think that you very much can break free, if need be. Leo, you are not entirely there, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. You might have some ideas and you might be inspired, and there may be moments where you don't fully know what's going on, and that might mean, Leo, that you should make sure that you're never in a situation where you have to be completely organized and together. So if you have a lot of responsibility today, or you're put into a situation where you have to exercise this responsibility, it might be just too much for you because you're just not in the mood. And being able to stay with one thing, to persist with, in sort of one state of mind, not get distracted, well, that might be hard work, because, it just does seem, Leo, that, there are complicated things going on, and I know you're trying to be organized and you're trying to be together, but there are times where it just could be hard work and you could just get distracted, and do accept that. And if you are getting distracted, you have to ask yourself, well, distracted by what? Maybe you're just distracted by something which is beyond you, that you don't fully understand. And you might sort of flip into something different. I won't say an altered state of consciousness, because that's just too dramatic. But you don't have to be in one state of consciousness all day long, and so that means that you have to ideally be in a situation, or in a place where you're relatively safe, where you are protected, and just be aware at the moment that you want to get into things deeply, And, if you're getting into things deeply and you're asking yourself serious questions, then it can be difficult to have to deal with the real world. The real world just seems rather boring, and it's not necessarily of any great interest to you. And that just might be just the way it is. And so if things are complicated and you want to make them complicated, well, then go ahead. And at some stage, though, the moon will change sign, because the moon starts today in Pisces, and you've perhaps just been recovering from this total eclipse of the moon. And this total eclipse for Leos has been quite complicated, and you've been forced to become aware of things that you didn't really necessarily want to be aware of, and it's all very heavy. And then the moon changes sign. It moves into Aries. The moon could move into Aries late morning if you're in sort of Pacific coast of America. Might not be until tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But when the moon does move into Aquarius, Aries. When the moon does move into Aries, it's of course moving into a fire sign, and Leo, you are a fire sign, and the moon in Aries is going to be probably quite liberating. Suddenly, the complications will start to clear, and you can start to see things in a new way. And the moon, when it moves into Aries, it makes a conjunction to Neptune, and this conjunction to Neptune, may not be such a bad thing. Just being able to be aware of all the possibilities, and seeing that you don't have to be tied to any one thing, and that you can sort of perhaps move beyond your usual boundaries. I mean, you don't want to completely blast your boundaries away. I mean, that's a recipe for craziness, isn't it? You can't have that. But you can also, with moon conjunct Neptune, start to see the spiritual side of things, not the scary spiritual side of things, but the sense in which you are part of something bigger than yourself. And I think that is something that you really want, and you really need. And it's a contrast, isn't it? Because Leo can be very much into itself and its unique self, and it can be a sign that can be quite egotistical, but it just gets to be too much of a good thing, and sometimes you feel that you want to go beyond yourself. And at the moment, I really think that you can, that it is possible. Now, I would suggest, Leo, that you try not to reach conclusions today, especially if those conclusions relate to anything concrete, material, perhaps relating to your career, your overall direction. Because if you do reach conclusions, or at least if you think you're reaching conclusions, you may be wrong. You may have misunderstood something. You might just be prey to wishful thinking. You might think, oh, well, this is fine. You've sorted things out. You know which way you're going. The path is clear. And being a Leo, being a fixed sign, you might say, well, that's it. I know where I'm going. But you don't necessarily know where you're going. And so if you do make a decision, a firm decision, then be careful, because you might be making a decision with really insufficient information, or there could be a possibility of delusion. So it's a time for considering possibilities rather than restricting yourself to a single possibility. Virgo. It's still the sort of aftermath of the total eclipse. It's still very much with you. For some of the day, the moon is going to be in Pisces, and in other words, we've got the sun in Virgo, moon in Pisces, sun and moon still in opposite signs. And so, when you've got that happening, you're still trying to work things out. there are still ahead of you moments of perhaps realization, or perhaps you just see things for what they really are. And so, it is a lot to work out, especially if you're a Virgo. I mean, Virgos, okay, it's a sign that wants to understand, wants to know as much as possible. But sometimes all that information can be completely overwhelming, and so you don't want to take on too much today, Virgo, because it could be quite exhausting. Where do you stop? I mean, if you keep having to try to understand different facts, different piece of information coming from different sources, some of them might contradict each other, and so it's all rather difficult. And additionally, it's not a time where you can necessarily take your own initiatives, because the pressure from outside, perhaps from another person, could be quite strong, and it's difficult to just do things your way, and you have to kind of go with the flow, but you don't want to completely go with the flow. And perhaps with this moon opposition sun, this total eclipse, it's a time when you're still trying to make decisions about what can be trusted, what people can be trusted, because you can't necessarily do everything on your own, and sometimes a bit of trust is necessary. But of course, if you trust the wrong people, well, that's not going to be good, is it? And so perhaps there could be moments of realization. One aspect we have today is a conjunction between the moon and Saturn, and the moon-Saturn conjunction may, almost like at the last moment, get you to understand someone. Perhaps they do something or say something at the last moment, and it just becomes clear. Before it hadn't been clear. And so give people every chance to show you who they are, and just let people continue. So if they're in the middle of explaining something, or you're watching them do something, just keep watching, keep listening, and then there just might be a moment where it suddenly makes sense. Now, I mean, so far I've possibly given the impression, Virgo, that it might be a day which could be rather confusing, where it's difficult to know where to go. You've got other people to consider, and you might not know what's going on. But that's not the whole story. At some level, Virgo, you are making up your mind. And it's probably connected with the fact that you've just had this total eclipse. You're starting to make up your mind. You're starting to become clear, and you're starting to understand what you want. And you're also starting to realize what you don't want. And so that is quite an important change. And the fact that you're becoming definite means that you can start to make things happen. If you want something and you tell someone that you want something, then I don't think they're necessarily going to say no. I think that you'd be surprised how much influence you actually have. But perhaps to have that influence, you've just got to make the effort to appear accommodating. I think you can appear to be accommodating, but at the same time, you're not forgetting what is important. And if something matters to you and it's something you feel you need to get hold of, then I think that you can trust yourself to get the results that you are looking for. Libra, the question is something ready? And you might not feel that it is ready. And so if you feel unprepared and you're not ready to move to the next stage, whatever that stage might be, then it's best that you just stick with what you're doing. And there's no harm in, trying your hardest to make something perfect. I mean, of course, perfection is an impossible ideal, but, do give it your best shot. And, perhaps if we look back to the total eclipse, the Pisces total eclipse, this eclipse does allow you to get an understanding of what you can do, and you can perhaps see now that perhaps it just hasn't been good enough. And so I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm just telling you that you perhaps need to just try harder, not much harder, but it's just part of the process of the eclipse. And when you're ready, when everything comes together, as I think it will come together, then you can move to the next stage, whatever that next stage might be. And while you're at it, you can argue your case. I think if other people are holding you up and are preventing you from making the most of what you have, perhaps also getting in the way of whatever you're trying to prepare, whatever you're trying to sort out, then you can be very clear about what you want and what you need, and also, of course, what you don't want. And so through your verbal assertiveness, I think that you can sort of move things along, and additionally you'll be able to safeguard your own independence, because what you don't want to do is move to a new situation, particularly a social situation, when you haven't got yourself together. Because if you haven't got yourself together, you're making yourself vulnerable. So, for example, when you're asked questions, when you're explaining yourself, and if you haven't got the answers, then what you're going to do? You might look stupid in an extreme situation, or else it might be difficult for you to hold your own, and you might sort of be persuaded to follow another person's idea because you haven't sorted out your own idea. And so if you're sort of, for example, contemplating getting involved with anyone for whatever reason, you've got to make sure that before you get involved, you're very clear about what you want. And you have to make sure that your preparations, are all in order. But I think they can be in order. And, in the aftermath of this total eclipse, you have a clear idea, I think, about, what you need to do, how you need to go about it, and also how things might not have been done properly in the past. And it's not just about success and ambition. It's not just what it's about. It might just also be about health and well-being. And so if, for example, recently you felt under the weather, or you haven't completely felt yourself, then I think with this eclipse you perhaps have been given pointers about what perhaps you could be doing better in terms of how you've been looking after yourself physically, psychologically, and also spiritually as well. So some changes in that department, might be in order. When I say that department, I don't know. It could be to do with diet. It could be about exercise. It could be about just avoiding stressful situations. So again, it's the same theme about being properly prepared. Now, I know that sounds a bit difficult, having to get something together, and I'm certainly not trying to be patronising here. I'm just saying that this is a possibility, that things could be better, and there is room for improvement, and that should be good, because if things can be improved, well, yeah, I mean that gives you agency. It gives you power, and you don't have to put yourself into a position of vulnerability. And so I think Libra, you know what needs to be done. I don't have to be specific about it. Scorpio, you continue to be very original. I mean, you have been original for the last week or so. You've had some great ideas, and ideas on their own are of limited value. I mean, ideas, you could say ideas are a sort of penny a dozen, but it's what you do with the ideas that matter. And maybe right now that should be your focus. So you can be original, but having been original, and when you indeed you continue to be original, you can, if you give yourself the opportunity, you can start having a powerful impact, and you can change the way you do things. And when you tell people what's on your mind, they're going to listen, because you are at the moment an interesting person, even an exciting person, and you may even give the impression of being sort of ahead of the pack, that you've got ideas that other people just haven't realized yet. I mean, they will realize in the end. And so perhaps if you have such ideas, then be ready to act on them, and don't think that you have to do anything another person's way. It's not a day for fitting in. If you spend your time fitting in, or you don't want to offend anyone, you don't want to rock the boat, then that's a suggestion you've got something wrong. I mean, it is about you and your power, and also your originality. And so if there's something you can do, you can do it well, then be honest about it. And there even may be a place for some boasting. I mean, I know that one's not supposed to boast, but sometimes there is a place for boasting. But if you're sure of your ground, you just have to say that you are the best in certain areas, and in the end you will be recognized as being the best. And even if you're not recognized, so what? Because today it is about you. And indeed that's what the whole eclipse, the total eclipse, was about. It's about recognizing that you can't follow the crowd. I mean, you can certainly listen to what people say, but the crowd doesn't know best. The majority doesn't know best. That's not how it works. It is about you, and it is about your subjective perspective. Maybe it's not logical, but you just know that you're the one who who has the answers. Certainly, who has the answers for yourself. And so it's not a time for doing what other people say. And in the end, that is going to require some work. You've got the basics sorted out. You've established to some extent that you are special, that you are original. You've certainly established it in your own eyes, but perhaps you've now got to see things through. And over the next few days, that might require some work, and there might be some doubts. There are always going to be doubts, but that's the way it goes. But if you can just go through those doubts, then you can really build something up of lasting value. Sagittarius, the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. I mean, the moon has been in mutual reception to Jupiter, over the weekend, when the moon was in Pisces. The moon is still in Pisces. I mean, the moon will, in the end, move into Aries and no longer be in mutual reception to Jupiter. I mean, that might happen sort of late this morning if you're on the Pacific coast of the US. It might happen tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But, by and large, you can take advantage of that Moon-Jupiter mutual reception. And there's nothing necessarily that you have to do. I think that if you have established yourself in one place, that is fine. I don't think that you have to sort of spend the day moving from one place to another, feeling that one thing's not good enough. You've got to constantly move around. I mean, you don't, and perhaps that's the advantage of a Moon-Jupiter mutual reception. Especially as the Moon and Jupiter are also in trine. I mean, Moon trine Jupiter. It's a really good aspect, Moon trine Jupiter, and that might indicate that just things move easily, and you don't have to do anything. I mean, that's a great thing. You can just enjoy what you've got in your own way without having to be anyone else, and having to sort of pander to the crowd, do what other people say. That's not what it's about. And so it can be a day, Sagittarius, when you are quite self-contained. So that's one way in which the day could manifest. I mean, the moon does eventually move into Aries. And so, when the moon moves into Aries, there will be a few changes. I mean, the moon moving into Aries, it's a fire sign. You're a fire sign. And so when the moon moves into Aries, you possibly become sort of more animated, maybe more of an extrovert, and you also, I think, become more adventurous. Perhaps you start the day having your doubts. You're not sure about how far you can go, and your caution exists for a good reason, but you might reach a stage where you feel that you can go beyond your existing boundaries and, perhaps show off a bit, show the world what you can do. I mean, you don't have to be over the top about it, but that is a possibility, especially if you're in the Americas, because the moon goes into Aries. Might go into Aries as early as late morning. I think even earlier if you're in Hawaii. So there is a change over the course of the day. Now, on a different note, issues of authority might be weighing in on you, and the question is, how do you deal with authority? And at the moment, the average Sagittarian is not really going to appreciate being bossed around, and that bossing around can come from bureaucracies. It can come from officials. It can, if you happen to meet police officers, for example, over the course of the day, and anyone who has authority, whether it's some sort of local authority, someone who happens to be in a position at a particular time. I mean, it could be something happening at work or one of your friends, someone appearing to show authority, and I don't think you're going to take kindly to it, and you're going to resist it. And the question is that the right approach? And I'm not saying it's the wrong approach, but you need to know what you're doing, and perhaps you need to think about it. So I think it's a day when you can confront authority and question authority, but don't be impulsive about it. Really think about it and make sure that you're grounded in the facts and perhaps in the law. On the other hand, if you are yourself in a position of authority, then it's a different matter. I think that you can really be authoritative. People will take you seriously. And there's then a question of how far do you take authority? So Sagittarians who are in authority could possibly today take things too far, and you might become overly aggressive, overly assertive, and you might sort of really expect everyone to sort of do what they're told. And so maybe that's the right approach, but I think you would have to be, ever so slightly careful in that situation. Capricorn. The moon is making a conjunction to Saturn. And this conjunction to Saturn is taking place in very late Pisces, in the last degree of Pisces. So this conjunction between the moon and Saturn may say something about how you are communicating, how you're expressing yourself. I think that you can come over as being someone who is very serious. People will certainly pay attention to you. And it may be that this moon conjunct Saturn is kind of influenced by the eclipse, because we've just had this total eclipse, and how has this total eclipse been working for you? It could have been a moment where you start to see things. Perhaps you didn't really get them before, but now you are starting to get them, and you're starting to understand things. And if you're understanding things, then, well, it's natural to want to talk about them and to explain them. And you would, then assume that people will listen to you. And I think in most cases they will listen to you. But you have to be careful that you don't, take things too far. You're capable of being, in your own way, ever so slightly intimidating. You can be very sure of yourself, and some people, when they get close to you, may regard you as just being just a bit too much, and so they might want to sort of tiptoe around you with that moon conjunct Saturn. But it may be a good opportunity, to take advantage of your position of authority. If you feel you understand what's going on, and I think that you probably do understand what's going on, and you listened to the total eclipse, and now you're ready to pass the message on. And so I think overall that moon conjunct Saturn should be a positive, but make sure that you're not overbearing. And then the moon does move into Aries at some stage today. Okay, it could be tomorrow if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. But when the moon moves into Aries, there is a change, and moon moving into Aries means that you may perhaps want to keep things to yourself more. You perhaps won't be quite so much in the mood for verbalizing your thoughts and trying to push your ideas forward. Instead, you might want to keep things to yourself more, and you might be just satisfied, in your own secure world, and that's good. But the moon does make a conjunction to Neptune, and so that moon conjunct Neptune may indicate that might be moments in the day, particularly towards the end of the day, where there are things that you're just not sure about. You thought you knew about them. You thought that the eclipse had given you all the answers, and you were speaking with great certainty, perhaps about other things which involved other people. But perhaps when it comes to your own domain, what is the definition of your domain? Where does your domain start? Where does it end? Those kind of questions. There might be, Capricorn, just this feeling that you're not quite sure, and there may be a sort of moments of concern and worry, but it's just passing. And I think that once the Moon Neptune conjunction is over, you'll feel better, and you'll feel more in control, and better able to define, what is important, and who you are and where you're going. So, looking at the day overall, Capricorn, I think it's a time when you have a good understanding of the way it's all working, and I think that you will be able to communicate with power and conviction. Aquarius. The moon continues moving through Pisces for most of the day. I mean, Pisces, is the sign following Aquarius, and it is a sign that can relate to the material world. It can be about money, and I talked about the total eclipse of a moon, and I suggested that this total eclipse could have a financial dimension, that you did need to think about what was real, what was yours, and perhaps what is owed to you. So if you feel that something is owed to you, then I think that you'll be pretty good at getting hold of it. And I think that you'll also be sure of your ground. I mean, that's always important, especially if you're dealing with an argument, where you have a view about what is owed to you. There might, particularly in a financial argument, you're able to give the impression that you've thought it through. You're not just making it up as you go along. You're in the right. And so if you have the kind of discussion about money and about who owes what, and then I think that you just give the impression of knowing what you're talking about. And that's not just about money. If you talk about anything today, and particularly if you're talking about something of a sort of a legal or administrative or bureaucratic nature, Aquarius, then I think that you are going to be sure of your ground, and you will have a good understanding of the rules or the law and how it is all connected. So, I think that looks pretty good. And then some stage today, okay, it might be tomorrow, the moon does change sign. The moon moves, out of Pisces into Aries. And, when the moon moves into Aries, that's a sign that the immediate impact of the total eclipse is over, because the moon will no longer be in the opposite sign to the sun, because obviously when you've got an eclipse of a moon, you're going to have the sun and the moon in opposite signs. But when the moon moves into Aries and the sun is still in Virgo, well, it's no longer there. I mean, it's a different situation. And so when the moon changes sign, I mean, some of your concerns, or at least your immediate concerns about money and the material world, may settle down. I mean, they're still there, I think, but you may be in a position where you can start to think about other things perhaps of a more lofty nature. I mean, the moon is making a conjunction to Neptune, and that moon conjunct Neptune, might sort of help you to relax and also tune into something, perhaps slightly sort of beyond yourself, because, when the moon changes sign, it makes a conjunction to Neptune, it makes a sextile to Uranus, and it makes a sextile to Pluto. And so those two sextiles, that means that the moon will be on a Uranus-Pluto midpoint. And so, yes, you can relax, but you can also be relaxed about what you can do, and you can perhaps start to feel your own power, a power just that goes beyond the material world. It's about feeling about what you can do, what you can achieve, and it's perhaps nice to be able to move a bit beyond the material world. I mean, as an Aquarius, you don't want to get too sidetracked by worries about money and possessions. It's kind of a bit beneath you, so it's kind of useful. But in the end, as you move towards the end of the day, or perhaps into tomorrow, you can start to sort of look at things on a sort of a more sort of universal and sort of inspirational level. Pisces, the moon, the sum of the day, maybe even all of the day, is moving through your sign, and it's in mutual reception to Jupiter, and additionally it is trine Jupiter. So the Moon-Jupiter relationship, is pretty good. I mean, it's you've got the Moon in your sign, and it's making a trine to Jupiter. I mean, that trine to Jupiter is great. I mean, it makes you feel alive, and also it's pretty lucky. And I think that the Moon-Jupiter trine is a good thing to have right after the eclipse. I mean, I don't know how you have experienced this total eclipse, but this total eclipse, for many of us, many Pisceans, I mean, I'm not a Pisces, so I don't quite know how you might be experiencing it, but this eclipse could have been something of a revelation. It could have been powerful. It might have been perhaps disturbing, but you weren't quite sure, or maybe you're not quite sure how it's all going to develop. But having that Moon trine Jupiter gives you a consolation, and maybe it's more than a consolation. It allows you to take something that is potentially difficult and to turn it round into something more resembling an opportunity, something that you can actually use. And it's also about a turn. It's about something becoming lucky, maybe something that you thought was difficult and you were worried about it. Then Moon trine Jupiter is saying, well, actually, there's no problem at all. And with Moon trine Jupiter, you might feel a degree of relief. Well, it's just not so bad. And you can now see what is possible. And you may get a strong sense of your own abilities, and so that is a good way to start to integrate the total eclipse. And then the Moon, having made a trine to Jupiter, it moves on and makes a conjunction to Saturn. That Moon conjuncts Saturn in your sign. You remember, Saturn's gone retrograde and it's now in your sign, and so that's perhaps about you taking the chaos of the eclipse and taking the opportunities of the eclipse, the possibilities of the eclipse, and just grounding it all and turning it into something real, which you can, very much use. And so, in the end, Pisces, you might have a great feeling of confidence, a confidence that nothing is going to stand in your way, and and that includes the most tedious things, the things that we all have to worry about, organizations, bureaucracies, officialdom, even the law of the land. Okay, you can't break the law, but it's a good idea to understand the law and to know how the law all fits together. And, for some Pisceans, there may be issues around law and what you can do, what you can't do. And if you are concerned with anything legal, then you start to understand that something perhaps that you thought was a problem that you couldn't do, there may be a way around it. Again, I'm not saying that you should be breaking the law. It's all about understanding a law, and it's knowing what you can do and what is possible, and not being afraid of the law. And so that means, Pisces, that depending on your situation, but you should be quite good at relating to authority at the level of an equal. You're not going to be overwhelmed by someone who supposedly has a lot of bureaucratic power. You won't be shaken off. You won't be afraid. And that goes back to this idea, Pisces, that right now you do have a great deal of self-confidence. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I want to look at today from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 58, which is the joyous. Now, the joyous, by its name, would indicate something quite fortunate. And when we look at the structure of this hexagram, we see two trigrams which are repeated, and each of those trigrams represents a lake. So the lake over the lake, and it's watery, and so you would have expected things to be very easy. And with the joyous, you think about enjoying oneself, and so that looks good. And so it may well be a day when you're thinking about enjoyment and thinking about leisure and pleasure, and also other people's enjoyment, and other people seem to want to enjoy the life and to make the most of it, and not to have to worry too much about boring responsibilities. But the trouble is that the joyous can go too far, and a lot of the lines in the joyous are not actually very positive. Even the fifth line, in the I Ching, the fifth line is usually the most fortunate line. Even the fifth line isn't great. And so it's a kind of an interesting hexagram here, that it seems to be good, but when you actually analyze it, it's not quite so good. And another way of looking at the joyous, if you look at Greg Wincup's translation of the I Ching, he doesn't call it the joy, but he doesn't call it the joyous. He calls it stand straight. He's saying you've got to stand straight. Why would you want to stand straight? Well, if you don't stand straight, you're going to get knocked over. And you might be thinking of the water. It is a very watery hexagram. It's easy to get caught up in whatever's going on around us, all the merrymaking, people having fun, people not taking anything too seriously. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in it, to be overwhelmed by it. And that's not how we need to go about things. We need to stand straight. We need to be aware that this is all a delusion, that we have got to think about what needs to be done. And we certainly mustn't be overly influenced by other people, however happy they might be. In fact, perhaps the happier they are, then the more we've got to be worried. And so we've got the third line moving, and the third line warns us perhaps of just being overly relaxed, thinking, oh, we can do it, we can do what we like. If we want to make a fuss, we can. If we want to just enjoy ourselves, we can. It doesn't really matter, and we don't have to worry too much about the consequences of things. And reality is, of course, we do have to worry about the consequences of things. And as you move through the hexagram, even like with the fifth line, the fifth line is saying, well, just again getting caught up in how much fun we're having, and maybe, and an alternative approach would be to say, well, just because you think something needs to be said doesn't mean you should necessarily say it. You don't want to necessarily draw attention to yourself. It's not a situation that is as easy as it looks. And by the top line, because the top line moves in this, so we've got three lines moving: third line, fifth line, sixth line moves. So by the top line, things are really not looking good. There could be arguments, and someone might have a high opinion of themselves, too high an opinion of themselves, and as a result they might get knocked down, sort of brought down to earth. And so it is a difficult hexagram in the end. Now the question is, who is getting caught up in the whole thing, who is losing touch with reality. It might not be you. It might be the people around you. It depends where you are, who you're talking to. But there's just a lack of seriousness in a situation that probably is more serious than it looks on the surface. And our responsibility is, to not get overwhelmed by it. Or as Greg Wincup would say, you've got to stand up straight. You've got to not be the one who just dissolves themselves into the chaos. You've got to, stand up against it. Be the one who is, organized. Or, I suppose if you, it's like going to a party when everyone else might be drunk, but someone's got to be sober. Perhaps someone's got to drive everyone home. So that that might be how the joyous is working. Now it's a contradictory thing. This whole thing is contradictory. Because we've got our three moving lines. So we think we move to a different hexagram. So what do we move to? 58 moves to hexagram number 14, possession in great measure. So it moves into something completely different. I suppose the more moving lines you have, the more different it's going to be. I don't know whether that's always the case, but you can have up to 6 moving lines. So one hexagram can always morph into another hexagram if there are enough moving lines. And so possession in great measure indicates that if we get ourselves together, if we don't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed, if we are disciplined, if we resist the temptation to, fall in with other people's lack of sincerity and lack of seriousness, then, we can really take control of the situation. And possession in great measure in this context probably is about our abilities and what we have, and we're not going to lose touch with what we have. It doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter how much chaos there is. It doesn't matter what the temptation is. We're going to hold firm, and we're going to hold firm, and because we hold firm, we're going to keep what we have. And I think that is the important point. Possession in great measure, it's not about sort of making money, possessing loads of new things. It's about integrity. And integrity is about, holding on to what we have, to what we possess. And perhaps the most important thing we possess is our character and our moral code and our ethical stance and our responsibility and our knowledge of what's important. So we hold on to all of that in spite of all the temptations. And, we come out looking pretty good. We've kind of passed the test. So maybe today is something of an ordeal. We're tempted to do stuff which isn't desirable. We're tempted to just follow the crowd, but we do hold firm. That's why it is an ordeal. An ordeal as in a sort of the medieval concept of an ordeal, something one has to go through. And are we going to get through that ordeal? And I think that we can get through it, and we can come out of this looking pretty good. And so I'm going to finish by looking at the United Kingdom. There seems to be a lot going on here. I've already talked about Angela Rayner and her resignation. I talked about it quite briefly, so I want to sort of revisit the issue. And so let's start off by looking at the chart of when she resigned. I believe the letter came out sort of on the evening of on the Friday evening, which would be the 5th. So here's the chart of the resignation. So just a reminder of what happened is that she was supposed to, she bought, how did she go? She bought an apartment in Hove, which is in southern England, and it was her second residence. And so because it was her second residence, she was supposed to pay an elevated level of property tax, with type of property tax called a stamp duty, but she didn't pay this tax, and she was advised to get expert tax advice, but she didn't follow this advice. And of course, because she was a housing minister, so she was housing minister, she was deputy head of a Labour Party, and she was deputy prime minister. So she had these three big roles. If you're a housing minister, you're supposed to know about tax, and particularly tax on property and on the purchases of property. So she had to resign, and this was a blow to the government, because potentially a blow to the government. We don't really know. It may well be that the powers that be wanted her to go. I mean, she came from a sort of a fairly sort of humble background. She'd been a carer. I think she was a teenage mother, and she was quite working class, and she was considered to be authentic. And many people are saying how effective she was as a politician. I'm not entirely convinced. I think that people are perhaps a bit too positive about her, a bit too gushing in their praise. I'm not convinced that if she'd become prime minister, I'm not convinced she would have won the next election. I don't think so. But anyway, I'm not in the UK. I wouldn't know. But I should know to some extent. But so this is the chart for her resignation. I believe September the 5th, which is September the 5th, 2025, at sort of 8:23 p.m. And this happened just as Uranus was going retrograde. So Uranus was 1 degree 28 Gemini. So the next day Uranus went stationary retrograde, and I do think that this retrograde Uranus really is important. I think it sort of dominates proceedings, and as I will demonstrate. I mean, when you look at the various charts, and so obviously that chart in itself, we can't really tell much from it. Well, okay, 8:23 p.m. If that really was the time that the letter came out, Venus was trine the ascendant. And of course, this was about a female cabinet minister. The Labour Party, in spite of their concern about equality and so forth, they've never had a female leader. There's never been a female Labour leader. There's never been a female Labour prime minister. I mean, whereas the Tories have had I think, three female prime ministers. So Angela Rayner was going to be perhaps the one. I mean, people were thinking that Keir Starmer was going to stand down in the end. I mean, Keir Starmer clearly is someone who has no stomach for politics. He's just not an effective politician. He's not liked, and someone like Angela Rayner would be a lot more effective. And Angela Rayner is an Aries, and people who are Aries, they often do well in the UK. Nigel Farage is an Aries, and so she might have done well. You don't know, and of course she's not gone yet. I mean, okay, she has gone, but it doesn't mean to say that her political career is over. So the question is, what should we be looking at first? What is a chart that sort of links Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer? Well, Keir Starmer is leader of the Labour Party, and Angela Rayner is a deputy leader. They both became deputy leader at the same time, on the same date, and that date was April the 4th, 2020. So here's the chart when you had a leadership election. You had an election for the deputy leadership. Keir Starmer. So this is when Keir Starmer took over, and it's a chart. I mean, I looked at the chart a couple of days ago, but I did just want to go over it again. This is not a good chart. although you could say it is a good, I mean, it must, why not? I mean, he did become prime minister in the end. I mean, this is a reminder, perhaps, that however bad the chart, you can still make something of it. So, although it's not great, you could say, well, it worked okay. I mean, he did become prime minister. Angela Rayner did become deputy prime minister. I mean, the problem with the chart is kind of numerous. There is a Mars conjunction. There's a Mars Saturn conjunction in the chart. So that's the first point, which is not particularly fortunate. And then you got a Mercury-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. There is a real issue of leadership. Where is the leadership really going? Do they really know what they're doing? I mean, it's said that when Keir Starmer became prime minister, he just wasn't properly prepared. They weren't really prepared for government. That's been said on numerous occasions, even by their supporters. And so the moon at 23 degrees Leo is, I believe, void. So it's made its last aspect before leaving the sign. But in spite of that, in spite of having a void moon, this chart, did go somewhere, in the sense that, Keir Starmer did win the 2024 election. So just over 4 years after he became leader, he became prime minister. And then there is Venus. I think that Venus is very interesting, because Venus in a chart, you could say, represents, it's a universal significator of women. And you've got a female deputy leader. Now, you had a female deputy leader of a party. I mean, that's not necessarily immediately obvious, because Venus is not really very prominent. I mean, it's in the 12th house, but its prominence kind of becomes clear when you look at what was going on at the time of Angela Rayner resigning. And so when she resigned, if we compare this chart with the resignation chart, so if we put Starmer leadership with her resignation, so Uranus was at 1 degree 28 Gemini. So Uranus was conjunct the Venus of this chart. And so the real shock here relates to a woman in the form of Angela Rayner. And what primed this? I mean, I think Uranus conjunct the Venus on its own would perhaps not have been especially spectacular, but the previous lunation before the resignation was, of course, the new moon in Virgo. And that new moon in Virgo was at 0 degrees 23 minutes Virgo. And so that new moon was square Venus in the chart. So the new moon squared Venus, so that was perhaps making a difficult aspect of Venus to the female principle in the chart, to the female side of that date, the deputy leader, a woman. And then Uranus comes along and it sort of smashes it, and that's a final that's the end. And of course, one other thing that I pointed out last time I looked at the chart is Pluto at 1 degree 42, so 1 degree 42 Aquarius. So that means that Pluto was relatively close to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So becoming leader of a Labour Party or deputy leader of the Labour Party with a Mars-Saturn conjunction is not exactly a good omen, especially as this Mars-Saturn conjunction links up with Uranus. So having Mars square Uranus, Saturn square Uranus, and Pluto on the midpoint of Mars and Saturn, that that's not a particularly good omen. So it's not surprising that as in Pluto in early Aquarius has just caused so many problems, and it's just this time for Keir Starmer as leader has he's generally regarded as being sort of a bit of a disaster. Now, as far as Angela Rayner is concerned, I have looked at her chart, every now and then. I think the sort of interesting thing about Angela Rayner is her Mars. I think her Mars, she's got Mars at 26 Leo, and there are a couple of other famous people who've got their Mars at 26 Leo, like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, it's a female chart, so maybe Mars in Leo is shown in a sort of a different way in such a chart, but she has Jupiter at 1 degree. 1 degree 31 Virgo, and I think that Jupiter, and I won't go over it again, but I think I do think that Jupiter in Virgo says quite a lot about the mistake she made. Jupiter in Virgo is in its detriment, and Jupiter just focuses on things that aren't so important and misses the big picture. In other words, not paying enough attention on making sure, if you are housing minister, that you pay the right level of tax, and sort of trying to skip the £40,000 extra. That just could be Jupiter in Virgo. She couldn't help herself. She was just thinking about the money, and it was an expensive flat expensive apartment in Hove, flat in British English, apartment in American English. £800,000. That is a lot of money, and which is well over $1 million US. And so I know she's deputy prime minister, but probably I think she was probably struggling to afford this, and so saving £40,000, that's always worth doing, and that might be how the Jupiter in Virgo worked. Plus, we now know that that new moon on the 23rd of August at 0 degrees 23 Virgo was on her Jupiter, and now Uranus went retrograde at 1 degree 28 Gemini. So Uranus was going retrograde right next to her Jupiter. I mean, by the way, I don't have a time of birth for her, but she's an Aries. She's a British politician. People who are Aries, Aries has a sympathy with Britain. I mean, in the sort of Ptolemaic, the sort of 2,000 years ago, Ptolemy's geography. I mean, I think that Northwest Europe was linked with the fire signs. I believe that England was Anglia or Britannica was regarded as being ruled by Aries. So it's kind of maybe not surprising that someone who has their sun in Aries, has done so well politically. And so that is those are a few thoughts on her chart. And so she has a particular relationship with Keir Starmer. It's always a good idea to look at the relationship between her chart and Keir Starmer. So here is Keir Starmer's chart. I mean, so here's Keir Starmer's chart, and we will put we'll put Angela Rayner on the outside wheel. So if we put if we see if there's any link between her and him and Angela Rayner. So the theory is, what people are saying is that he needed Angela Rayner, because she was a representative of, the trade. She'd worked her way up through the trade union movement. She sort of was representative of, she was working class, and so much of the Labour Party is now just sort of metropolitan elites. And so having someone like Angela Rayner, it provided a bit of balance and sort of reminded the country of its sort of working class roots, which it seems to have, the party seems to have largely forgotten. And so, her Jupiter, her Jupiter was conjunct his Uranus, and I somehow think that is important. This Uranus is coming up again, and his Uranus is at 1 degree 27 Virgo. So when Uranus squared Angela Rayner's Jupiter, it also squared Keir Starmer's Uranus. And so Uranus square Uranus, well, that's quite a generic transit. When you are in your early 60s, you will have Uranus square your Uranus. That's when it happens. And so you have your Uranus return when you're, around 84. And so he's sort of 3/4 of his way there to being 84, and so it's an important sort of generic aspect, and her Jupiter is perhaps part of it. And you would think that her Jupiter on his Uranus would be a plus, but maybe it wasn't a plus. Maybe we should see that Jupiter in Virgo as being in its detriment. And perhaps it's what I said, that her inability to get a sense of perspective, Jupiter in Virgo, in its detriment, thinking perhaps of some kind of short-term gain, which is completely out of perspective, just not getting a view. She forgot she was a housing minister, and she was just thinking about the £40,000. And that Jupiter in Virgo just completely short-circuited his Uranus in Virgo, his Uranus in Virgo, and really brought it out into the open. And this was the shock that Keir Starmer had. Now, normally, if you've got a transit to your Uranus, it's not necessarily a big deal, because it's a transpersonal planet. But of course, in the case of Keir Starmer, he's a politician. He's a tool of the collective, and so his Uranus does become important. I'm sure the collective will get rid of him when the time is right. He doesn't have any control. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just an instrument, and so Uranus square Uranus is indeed really making things happen for him. And it's interesting, his Keir Starmer's Uranus, because Keir Starmer has his Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint, well, one can see that in terms of relationships. Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint is about very fast attractions, getting suddenly really attracted to someone out of nowhere, and then becoming unattracted to them just as quickly. So it's very, very quick. It's a quick attraction. And Venus and Mars, you would have thought that you'd think that says something about his sexuality, Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint. But her Jupiter's on his Venus-Mars midpoint. I wonder about that. What, for example, are his? How does she occur to him? I think she probably occurs to him in quite a sort of an interesting way. We'll never know. But so that's just an interesting connection there. And then Uranus comes up and it sort of disrupts the relationship. When I say relationship, they have a relationship because he's the leader of the Labour Party and she's deputy leader. That is a relationship. What I'm just speculating about was what he privately feels about her. There are all sorts of speculations. There is a view that he wants her out. She's perhaps an embarrassment. So, I mean, I think that there is something more complicated. And Keir Starmer, but despite his attempts to come over as someone technocratic, he is quite a bizarre and complex person. I think, as many people have mentioned, there seems to be something hidden about him, something that we don't fully get, something we don't fully understand. And so Keir Starmer, when we look at what's happening to Keir Starmer, and and his leadership. Well, we can always look at the moment when he became prime minister. I mean, this is a chart of Keir Starmer's government, and Saturn has. This is, I think, I got 12:15 p.m. Saturn has already crossed the descendant, and it's gone sort of back into Pisces. So you might say that Saturn, having crossed the descendant, that perhaps Saturn has, some of the pressure from Saturn has kind of gone, and Neptune is right on his descendant. So, sorry, not when his descendant, the descendant of the government, not when he became leader of the Labour Party. This is when he became prime minister. And so you might say that this has... Neptune and Saturn have they're moving back off the descendant, and they're moving into Pisces. And so perhaps this is sort of storing something up for next year. And so just looking at the leadership, I wouldn't have said that things are necessarily going to get much worse. I mean, next year is a different matter, by the way. And so... That's the Starmer regime's its leadership. Then there is Starmer's solar arc directions, and I think that Starmer's solar arc directions are significant, and a couple of his solar arc directions are significant at least. So what Starmer has at the moment. So remember, solar arc directions. He's just turned 63, and so we would move every planet in his chart, approximately 63 degrees, and so he has a Sun-Pluto conjunction in his horoscope, and so we would move that Sun-Pluto conjunction 63 degrees. So if we move that Sun-Pluto conjunction 63 degrees, it moves on to 11 degrees Scorpio. And 11 degrees Scorpio is where his Neptune is. So the Sun-Pluto conjunction has moved to his Neptune. So he's just had Sun on his Neptune. I mean, we don't know where his time of birth is. We don't know what time he's born. So we kind of would need that to be sure. But approximately now he's got his secondary progressed Sun on his Neptune, and it's a time where everything is up in the air. He doesn't know what's going on. He's confused. He is perhaps prey to collective influences that he doesn't fully understand. And you look at him getting sidetracked by Ukraine. It looks as if he's trying to just avoid Britain's domestic problems by spending all his time going to visit his friend Macron in Paris, or going to Kiev or Washington. So, I mean, that's a standard thing that government leaders do when they're in trouble. They like to travel, and when you've got this Ukrainian possibility, there was even a suggestion that a good way of dealing with Britain's problems is to go to war, because then people can stop worrying about domestic issues. Maybe a good war would help stimulate the economy. I don't think it would. Difficult to stimulate the economy when you're under nuclear attack. But so that's one aspect of his solar arc directions. But then is his solar arc directed Mars. His solar arc directed Mars is perhaps quite worrying, because his solar arc directed Mars is at 9 degrees 2 Virgo. So he has got his Sun at 9 degrees 30 Virgo. I mean, he'll have his Mars anywhere between 9 Virgo and 10 Virgo. So approximately his solar arc Mars is on his sun. Now, that could be about him getting worked up, getting aggressive. Could be, he's prime minister. Could be about him really desperately wanting to get involved in the war in Ukraine. And so there is certainly a disturbing side to that. Now, I wanted to just finish by looking ahead. I mean, very briefly looking ahead. We've just had one eclipse, and we've had this total eclipse. And of course, in 2 weeks' time, we have another eclipse. We have a partial eclipse. And the partial eclipse we have is here. Let me just show you. We've got the new moon eclipse coming up on September the 21st, 2025. And I think that this eclipse could be pretty bad for the UK. And so this eclipse, I think it could be pretty bad in general. I mean, I will, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be looking at this eclipse in more detail. But I think we need to prepare ourselves for it. The thing about this eclipse, okay, it's at 29 degrees 5 Virgo, and Saturn will be at 28, 28 Pisces. So this eclipse is opposition Saturn. So that in itself is a problem. And in fact, it's also going to be semi-sextile Mars. You see, you've got Mars at 29 Libra, you've got the Sun at 29 Virgo, you've got the Sun, Saturn at 28 Pisces. So a really difficult eclipse. Now, you could say that this eclipse is kind of on the ascendant of the time when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. So if we go back to this chart, so the eclipse is sort of there. It's not exactly there. So that's one thing to be concerned about. But what I'm also concerned about is the chart of England. This is a 1066 chart when William I was crowned, and on Christmas Day, it does say December the 21st, but that's December the 21st Gregorian. Julian, that was December the 25th. So England's moon is at 29 degrees 4 Pisces, and I think the moon is important. I think we can be fairly sure that we don't know precisely when William the Conqueror was crowned, but he's going to be crowned around sort of midday. I mean, he's not going to be crowned in the middle of the night, so I think we can be reasonably sure that the moon was at around 29 Pisces. So this moon is hit by the partial eclipse. So we're going to have Saturn conjunct, reasonably close to the conjunction with England's moon, and we're going to have a new moon partial eclipse opposition the moon. And so what does the moon represent? The moon can represent the people. The people are just not happy, and it's all falling apart. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, and it might just be about the general well-being of the country. I mean, the moon is ruler of the fourth house, but if this time is right. So with Saturn hitting. With Saturn and a new moon hitting England's moon, we need to look ahead to this next eclipse, the partial eclipse in 2 weeks' time. And finally, I just want to focus on one of his, because he reshuffled the cabinet, and the Home Secretary, like the Minister of Interior, or the Home Secretary was Yvette Cooper. And Yvette Cooper, I mean, I don't know what time she was born, should be available because she was born in Scotland. So usually people born in Scotland, the birth times usually are very available. But because on Scottish birth certificates, as opposed to English birth certificates, the time is always placed on it. So it should be available, her birth time. But I don't know what it is. Maybe I should have another look. So Yvette Cooper she has been made Foreign Secretary. So Foreign Secretary, it's an important position, and particularly when the world is so complicated and you've got a war in Ukraine. And so here is the chart for the new Foreign Secretary. Now, we don't know for sure whether she's a Pisces or an Aries. She is probably a Pisces. At noon, her sun is at 2940 Pisces, so she would have had to be an Aries. She would have had to have been born pretty late in the day. I mean, not exactly at midnight, but in the last couple of hours before midnight, I think. So I think it's likely that she's got her sun in Pisces. So we need to think about this in the context of the fact that we have a new moon eclipse coming up on the 21st, just before the equinox. That new moon eclipse, she'll have Saturn on her sun, and the new moon itself will be in 29 Virgo, so that will be opposition her sun. So I'm wondering, how long is she going to stay as Foreign Secretary? Because I think that eclipse is going to be could be quite devastating for her. So that's something to look at. I don't think it's going to work, her as Foreign Secretary. I mean, it may be that events will catch up on her. Though, kind of interestingly, she's born on March the 20th, and if she has any sense, she knows that there is someone she will have to deal with, or she should be dealing with, and that is, of course, the Russian foreign minister, because he was born not on March the 20th, but on March the 21st. And so Sergei Lavrov, he like Yvette Cooper, he was born on the Pisces Aries cusp. In his case, at noon, I don't know what time he's born, noon in Moscow on March 21st, 1950, the sun was at 1 degree 11 Aries. So chances are he's an Aries, but he could easily be a Pisces if he was born in the morning. And so he, like Yvette Cooper, is going to be affected by this eclipse and by Saturn at 29 Pisces. But it's not. I don't think it's quite as strong. So it will be interesting if Sergei Lavrov and Yvette Cooper ever got to meet. I mean, maybe there'd be some scope for diplomacy there. But maybe I'm just being flippant here. But I mean, I think Yvette Cooper as a new foreign minister, as a new foreign secretary, with this eclipse on her sun, with Saturn hitting her sun, I don't think that looks good. And I'm just wondering, how long she's going to stay in that position. Normally you'd think she's going to be there for some time, but maybe circumstances will just move against her. I don't know. We'll have to see. And I will be talking more about the UK, sooner rather than later. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.